This week, we're in Paul's letter to the church in Philippi, what we know as Philippians. It's a short letter. It's only 4 chapters long, so it's only going to take us 4 days. So let's get to it. Here we go. It starts off by saying Paul and Timothy, right? Ancient letters started with the author first. So it's nice. You don't have to get to the end to find out who wrote the letter. This says Paul and Timothy. Now, this is a great point to stop and think about how ancient letters were formed, all right? It's been estimated that if you were to write a letter today, like a New Testament letter today, the price of that letter, the whole process, would be somewhere around $3,000, like in US dollars, okay, in 2024. So what Paul was doing was not cheap, which forces us to think, why is he writing? What's going on here? What was the purpose of this letter? It wasn't just like, I'm bored, let's write something, okay? So it's important here to read between the lines. Now, this letter, I think, is one of the most intentionally crafted letters that Paul writes. There's so many dots to be connected, so we jump right into it. Okay, here we go. Remember, it starts off with a ton of gratitude. He's like, I thank God every time I remember you. So the question you should be asking is, why? Like, why is he so grateful for these people? This is beyond his typical message of gratitude. And we see here in verse 5, in view of your participation in the gospel, or in the NIV it says your partnership in the gospel. Okay, so if you're asking questions like what's the purpose of this writing, in some way they've come alongside him. There's some kind of partnership. So were they there? What happened? You should be asking this the whole time. Now I'll spoil it for you. At the very end, we find out that these people funded his ministry. They funded his work. He's out there doing what he's doing because they gave him the money to do that. And so this is a really long thank you letter. Now, there's a lot of really valuable stuff in it. There are other reasons for writing, but this is like he's getting at that at the very beginning. They know what he's talking about. They're like, yeah, of course, we fund Paul, right? Okay, so it's important to remember that. Then we get to verse 12, and what I love about this is there's this section about what's going on in his personal circumstances. He's updating them, right? But he's also modeling what he teaches. He says 2 things, basically, in essence. One, that people are hearing about Jesus, but it's from people, the people that are spreading this message are doing it out of rivalry and selfish ambition. They're trying to make his life harder. He had some opponents out there. There's a story behind all this. But he's like, you know what? Either way, people are hearing about Jesus, and I'm celebrating that. Then he says, in this same section, he talks about how even though he's in prison, there are more people in the prison learning about Jesus. He's like, this is a good thing. What I love about this is that he is modeling what he's about to tell them to do in this letter. In chapter 4, he talks about the importance of keeping your mind on the good that's happening around you. So he's practicing what he preaches. But he does this again in verse 29. So in chapter 1, he talks about his suffering in this section, like things are tough, but there's good. And then he says to them, I want you to know that if you believe in Jesus, you're also going to suffer, just like he did. In essence, he's doing the same thing. I'm suffering, and you're going to suffer. It's like how Peter writes to in the letter that Peter wrote. He says, don't think that there's something strange happening to you when things go wrong. There's going to be suffering in your life. So Paul, again, very intentional. He's like, I'm suffering, you're going to suffer. Like he's talking about the good that's happening in his life, and then he tells them to focus on the good that's happening in their life. It also shows us that one of the reasons for him writing this is probably because the people in Philippi are suffering to some extent. So this is also being written to comfort them. There's a reason behind the specific things he chooses to include in the letter. So last thing. He says, for me, this is in verse 21, to live is Christ and to die is gain. In other words, if I'm alive, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and helping people and telling people about who Jesus is, like being an ambassador for him. But if I die, I'm going to be with him and all this struggle is going to be over. So then he has this like external processing situation in the letter where he's like, so let's weigh the pros and cons. You know, he's like, well, if I die, I'll be with him and it'll be great. But if I don't, then I'll be around for you, and it'll be beneficial for you and other believers like you, other churches like you. So he's like, all right, so I guess I'll stick around a little bit. What I love about this is, one, he's so like caring for other people and other churches, but two, Two, the reality of what happens after we die was so real to him. It was as real as waking up tomorrow and eating breakfast. Like it's just going to happen and it's going to be a good thing. And so like for me, it forces me to think like, man, what if it was that much of a reality to me? Like for us, what if like we just knew, oh yeah, if things go wrong, like if I don't make it beyond 5 p.m. today, things are going to be just fine. Like what if we live that way? How would that affect the decisions that we made today? So that's today's reading, day 1. Tomorrow's day 2. This is a great letter. It's going to be a lot of fun. Stick with it. See you tomorrow.